John F. Kennedy, then 43, was elected as the 35th President of the United States in 1960, making him one of the nation's youngest presidents and the country's first Roman Catholic. He was raised in one of the richest families in America and used his superior education and standing as a war hero to make a successful bid for the Senate in 1952 and for Congress in 1946. As president, Kennedy had to deal with escalating Cold War tensions in places like Cuba and Vietnam. As the civil rights movement grew, he finally gave government assistance and rekindled a renewed commitment to public service. The world was shocked by his murder on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, and the all-too-human Kennedy was transformed into a larger-than-life hero as a result. Historiographers still place him among the most beloved presidents in American history. John F. Kennedy, also known as Jack, was the second of 9 children, and he was born on May 29, 1917, in Brookline, Massachusetts. His parents, Joseph and Rose Kennedy, were Irish Catholic politicians from 2 of Boston's most illustrious political dynasties. Despite having ongoing health issues throughout his childhood and adolescence, he would later be given the diagnosis of Addison's disease, a rare endocrine disorder. Jack led a privileged childhood, going to exclusive schools like Canterbury and Choate and spending his summers in Hyannisport on Cape Cod. Joe Kennedy, a very wealthy businessman and early FDR supporter, was named head of the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934, and named the United States ambassador to Great Britain in 1937. Jack worked as his father's secretary, as a student at Harvard, and traveled around Europe. His senior thesis on how poorly the British were prepared for war was ultimately turned into the popular book, Why England Slept, 1940. Have you heard? John F. Kennedy's Senate career hit a rough patch when he declined to denounce Senator Joseph McCarthy, a close family friend who the Senate had censured in 1954 for his aggressive pursuit of alleged communists. Kennedy ultimately missed the vote because he was in the hospital recovering from back surgery, although having intended to vote against McCarthy. After enlisting in the U.S. Navy in 1941, Jack was deployed to the South Pacific 2 years later and assigned command of a patrol torpedo boat. The patrol torpedo boat 109 was hit by a Japanese destroyer in the Solomon Islands in August 1943. Kennedy received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroism for rescuing members of his marooned crew. Joe Jr., his older brother, did not fare as well. In August 1944, while on a covert operation against a German rocket launch facility, his Navy planes exploded, killing him. A hurting Jack was instructed by Joe Sr. that it was his responsibility to help Joe Jr. achieve his former goal of becoming the first Catholic president of the United States. By the end of 1944, Jack had given up his plans to become a journalist and left the Navy. He returned to Boston less than a year later to be ready to run for Congress in 1946. Jack easily won his party's nomination as a fairly conservative Democrat, supported by his father's wealth, and won the predominantly working-class 11th district in the general election by nearly 3-1 against his Republican opponent. Kennedy declared his campaign for president on January 2, 1960, having come close to receiving his party's nomination for vice president, under Adlai Stevenson, in 1956. He defeated Hubert Humphrey, a more liberal candidate, in the primary election and selected Texas Senator Lyndon Johnson as his running mate. Kennedy had a tough fight on his hands in the general election against Richard Nixon, the popular two-term vice president of Dwight D. Eisenhower's party. Kennedy profited from his performance and telegenic appearance in the first-ever televised debates, which were watched by millions of viewers and offered a young, energizing alternative to Nixon and the old quo. Kennedy was elected President of the United States in November by a slim margin, less than 120,000 votes out of around 70 million cast, becoming the youngest man and the first Roman Catholic to hold the office. Kennedy gave the White House an undeniable air of youth and glamour with his lovely young wife and their two young children, John Jr., born just weeks after the election, and Caroline, born in 1957. The new president urged his fellow Americans to work together in his inaugural speech, delivered on January 20, 1961, in the quest of development and the abolition of poverty, as well as in the struggle to win the ongoing Cold War against communism around the world. Kennedy's famous parting line, "Ask not what your nation can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," emphasized the necessity for sacrifice and cooperation on the side of the American people. Kennedy's approval of the proposal to launch 1,400 CIA-trained Cuban exiles in an amphibious operation at the Bay of Pigs in Cuba in April 1961 sparked the first major international crisis. The mission, which involved inciting a revolt that would topple communist leader Fidel Castro, was a disaster. Almost all of the exiles were either imprisoned or killed. Kennedy visited with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in Vienna that June to talk about Berlin, which had been split between Allied and Soviet rule following World War II. East German soldiers started building a wall to partition the city 2 months later. Kennedy gave one of his most memorable remarks in West Berlin in June 1963, after sending an army convoy to reassure the population of American assistance. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, Kennedy and Khrushchev again sparred. Kennedy announced a naval blockade of Cuba, after learning that the Soviet Union was building a number of nuclear and long-range missile installations in Cuba that could constitute a threat to the mainland United States. In exchange for America's vow not to invade the island nation and the removal of American missiles from Turkey and other places close to Soviet borders, Khrushchev agreed to dismantle Soviet missile positions in Cuba after a tense standoff that lasted over 2 weeks. Kennedy's greatest diplomatic triumph came in July 1963, when Khrushchev consented to sign a nuclear test ban treaty with him and British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. But Kennedy increased American engagement in the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia in an effort to stop the rise of communism, albeit privately lamenting the state of affairs. The president and his wife arrived in Dallas on November 22, 1963, after giving speeches the day before in San Antonio, Austin, and Fort Worth. The group then rode in a motorcade from the airport to the Dallas Trade Mart, where Jack's next speaking engagement was scheduled. Shots were fired shortly after 12:30 p.m. as the motorcade was traveling through downtown Dallas. Kennedy was hit twice, once in the neck and once in the skull, and was pronounced dead not long after getting to the hospital. While being escorted to jail, local nightclub owner Jack Ruby shot and killed 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald, who was known to have communist sympathies. Oswald was arrested for the murder. Alternative explanations for Kennedy's death started to circulate almost immediately, including plots hatched by the KGB, the Mafia, and the American military-industrial complex, among others. Oswald had carried out the assassination alone, according to a presidential commission headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, yet rumors and discussion about it have continued. As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them. Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. Things do not happen. Things are made to happen. Forgive your enemies, but never forget their names. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. Geography has made us neighbors. History has made us friends. Economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies. Those whom God has so joined together, let no man put asunder. A nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that is afraid of its people. When power leads man toward arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the area of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive and unrealistic. We are tied to the ocean, and when we go back to the sea, whether it is to sail or to watch, we are going back from whence we came. If we cannot now end our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. War will exist, until that distant day when the conscientious objector enjoys the same reputation and prestige that the warrior does today. Tolerance implies no lack of commitment to one's own beliefs. Rather, it condemns the oppression or persecution of others. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.